Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes just to make sure everyone has a chance to join. But this is the work group related to the potential amendments to the in-use off-road diesel regulation focused around contractor and public works potential requirements. So I guess I'll give it a minute or two for make sure everyone can join. Okay, I think that should be probably good. So let me get started. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this CARB working group related to the potential amendments to the in-use off-road diesel-fueled fleets regulation. In this meeting, we will be focusing on some potential new requirements to contractors and public works awarding bodies with the intent of improving compliance with the regulation. The concepts we will be discussing today are very early on in development, so we highly encourage feedback. First, a couple housekeeping items. First, the presentation material is available in the handout section of the webinar, and it is also posted on the ARB webpage. This webinar is being recorded, and the intent is to post the recording publicly, so just a reminder that any information you share may be accessible and released to the public. And lastly, there will be a question and answer period at the end of the entire presentation, and there will be two ways to participate. Attendees can either raise their hand and staff will call on you and unmute you to allow you to ask your question verbally, or you can type in the question area of the webinar and staff will read out your comment or question. Next, let's do some CARB staff introductions. My name is Nathan Dean. I work in the heavy duty off-road strategies branch, and I'll be the staff lead overseeing these potential amendments to the off-road diesel rule. Next, we'll have my manager introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Johanna Levine, and I'm the manager of the off-road implementation section, and the implementation of the off-road diesel regulation is in my group.
And then my branch chief, Tess.
Hello, I'm Tess Seacat. I'm the branch chief over the heavy duty off-road strategies.
We also have several enforcement staff with us today, so I'll let them introduce themselves as well.
Hi, I'm Erin Shields. I'm the manager of the diesel equipment enforcement section.
Hi, I'm Nelson Van. I am the lead staff for the enforcement section for the off-road regulation.
Thank you. So we wanted to start the meeting by going over our goals for these potential requirements. The first overarching goal, which is really the main goal for everything we do at CARB, is to improve California's air quality and protect public health. This regulation in particular aims to achieve reductions in nitrogen oxides and particulate matter emissions that are harmful to the environment. Today, we will be talking about adding new requirements to contractors and public works awarding bodies, which we believe will improve compliance with the regulation, which therefore helps ensure that emission reductions are being achieved in the real world. The two specific goals we have for these potential new requirements are to ensure only compliant fleets and equipment operate at construction sites, and that CARB will have the ability to determine ownership of equipment at the job site that is not compliant with the regulation. Now, we wanted to clearly define the new entities that we're considering adding these requirements to, the first of which are prime contractors. Currently, we plan to use the definition in Chapter 9 of Division 3 of the Business and Professions Code, and the intent is that this would be the original contractor for any work performed. What we mean by this is that the owner of the project would hire an original contractor, and that is the entity this would apply to. Any subsequent subcontractors are not intended to be included under these specific provisions. The second group of entities under consideration for these requirements are public works awarding bodies. An awarding body would mean any entity that awards a contract for public works projects. This could be any kind of public agency or official, such as state, county, city, etc., or also any private entity using public funds. So internally, we put a lot of thought into what we could implement that would achieve the goals outlined in that earlier slide. And to that end, we have come up with a preliminary concept for a tool that CARB could develop to be used by these new entities to help improve compliance. And that tool would be vehicle level certificates for vehicles that are subject to the off-road diesel regulation. My later slides discuss what we expect contractors and public works entities to do with this vehicle certificate, but first let's go over what it would include. The vehicle certificate would include the vehicle's EIN, some basic vehicle information, fleet compliance status, and some basic fleet information. These certificates would be issued similarly to how the fleet-wide certificates of reported compliance are issued, which is via DOORS. A certificate would be issued immediately when a vehicle is first registered in DOORS, and then annually on March 1st. Also, our current thinking is that if a fleet is non-compliant in DOORS, they would not be provided vehicle-level certificates. Now we want to discuss our proposal for what contractors and public works awarding bodies would need to do in relation to these vehicle certificates. First, contractors and public works awarding bodies would need to obtain a copy of the vehicle certificates and retain those certificates for all vehicles operating at the job site. Second, if any fleet attempted to bring a vehicle without a vehicle certificate or an EIN onto the job site, the prime contractor or the public works awarding body would have a duty to disclose that information to CARB. And third, if a vehicle does not have a vehicle certificate, the vehicle cannot be used on the job site. We are also considering requirements that would be related to record keeping and review, both for the vehicle certificates and for the fleet-wide certificate of reported compliance. First, contractors and public works awarding bodies would need to receive and review the fleet-wide certificate of reported compliance for all fleets on the project before hiring those entities. Second, they would need to receive and review the vehicle certificates before allowing those vehicles on the job site. And lastly, they would need to keep those records for 3 years after project completion. Now, this slide has a few additional requirements we're considering and a couple clarification points. Contractors and public works awarding bodies would need to disclose ownership of vehicles at the job site upon CARB's request. They would need to provide records within 5 business days upon CARB's request. Records can be kept in electronic or paper form. Contractors and public works awarding bodies would be required to report any non-compliance to CARB. And for projects that last multiple years, compliance must be verified annually. This would most likely take place sometime after March 1st of each year, as that is when compliance is updated for the new year and new certificates would be provided. We are considering implementing these provisions soon after these amendments are adopted. We most likely have some new stakeholders in today's work group, so I'll briefly go over the timing of this amendment process. We had a kickoff workshop back in May of this year and are currently hosting several working groups to refine that concept. Next, we plan to have a second workshop in November of this year with a more solidified concept and language to discuss with the public. After that, we develop the regulatory documents and go through a formal public comment period with a goal of taking these amendments to our board towards the end of 2022. After that, it can take up to a year for the Office of Administrative Law to make the amendment official, at which point the amendment is in effect. All that is to say that our current timeline could see these amendments officially in place sometime in 2023. So we're considering issuing these new vehicle level certificates for the first time in March of 2024. An important question, though, is once we have issued the vehicle level certificates, what is a reasonable amount of time to allow contractors and public works awarding bodies to receive these certificates? And that's especially important for projects that would be ongoing at that time. This is something that we're looking for feedback on from this work group. Here, we also wanted to tee up a discussion on what the potential costs to stakeholders would be due to these new requirements. A critical part of the regulatory process is fully analyzing the economic impacts of any additional requirements, so this will need to be fully explored as we develop this further. Our current thinking is that additional costs could be incurred by stakeholders due to updating their contract language to reflect these new requirements, the labor needed to collect and review the vehicle certificates and to report noncompliance to CARB, and the potential record-keeping costs such as digital storage of certificates. Another question for the stakeholders today, though, is what other costs might there be due to these new requirements? Along that same vein, we developed a short list of questions to discuss with stakeholders today. First, what other information might be useful to include on those vehicle level certificates? If you recall from my previous slide, we had a basic concept of what to include, but any thoughts and ideas on this would be really great to hear. Second, what timing is reasonable to start implementing these requirements if the first vehicle level certificates would be issued March 1 of 2024? And lastly, as I just mentioned, what other costs could there be related to these requirements? So now we have our discussion period. There are two ways to participate. You can either raise your hand and staff will unmute you to allow you to speak, or you can type in the question section of the webinar. If you make a verbal comment, we ask that you introduce yourself and your affiliation. First, let's see if anyone has typed in any questions in the chat while I was speaking.
Yes, we've got a question from Debbie Shepard. Can you define on the job site? Is that delivering, being used to perform the work, or just parked?
I believe that would be on the job site, as in if it's parked on the job site or operating on the job site. I'm not sure if others from CARB have thoughts on that, but I think the intent is that if it's within the fence line, or if it's like on the job site, it would be applicable. Feel free to chime in, other CARB attendees.
I think that's right. I think I'm not entirely sure what delivering means. So if we could get some clarification on that, that'd be good, because it sounds like that might be an on-road vehicle that may or may not be subject to the off-road regulation. But if you want to provide some, oh, look at, I got that, delivering product. Well, I think that would be subject to the on-road regulation. So that isn't necessarily applicable here. So I agree with Nathan that I think our intent was equipment that would be within the fence line of the project, so parked or operating.
Okay, next question.
Got a question from Harmony Gates. How are these certificates different from the traditional doors reporting certificates that fleets get each year?
So the doors fleet-wide reported compliance, those are the certificates that say that this fleet is compliant with the in-use off-road diesel regulation, and it is for like that entire fleet. The intent of these vehicle level certificates is that they would provide information at the vehicle level. So when someone is attempting to bring a vehicle onto the job site, there would be a way to check that that vehicle has an EIN and is registered indoors. So the traditional, like what is done now, is a fleet-wide certificate of reporting, and this would be at the vehicle level. So each vehicle would have its own certificate with its EIN. And like we said, there was some like basic vehicle information we were thinking of including. in this certificate. So that's the difference.
And I'd like to add, one of the things that we're trying to address with this is the event that a fleet does not report all of their vehicles into doors. So they may actually have a fleet-wide certificate of reported compliance, but maybe has not actually reported all of their vehicles. So they could actually provide the prime contractor or the public works agency a fleet-wide certificate, but that may not be representative of their entire fleet. So this would then, each vehicle that was reported indoors would get a vehicle level certificate. So then they would have to provide that to verify that that vehicle is actually reported in their doors fleet.
We've got a question from Jerry Fernandez. Is this certificate going to be uploaded into the Department of Industrial Relations Public Works application?
I think that's a good comment. I don't think we've thought about how this would be used in other places. That's something we can look into. I guess the intent right now is that we would not have that. I think it's more just something that we have to look into, I guess. I don't know if you have something to add.
The intent of this would be to show compliance with the CARB regulation, not for any other agency's regulations. If you want to provide more details on what that program is used for and how you would want to use it, that's something that we could definitely look into. But generally, the purpose of this certificate would be for compliance with CARB's regulations, and we weren't really looking outside of that.
Thank you. We've got a question from Sean O'Donoghue. Is there a minimum fleet size?
So the current regulation has fleet sizes of large, medium, small, and I believe any fleet that has a diesel-powered off-road piece of equipment, 25 horsepower or greater, is considered a fleet. I don't know if Johanna, you want to give more background of the original regulation, but basically anything that has a 25 horsepower or greater diesel off-road piece of equipment is subject to this rule and would have a fleet indoors.
Yes. So the minimum fleet size is one vehicle that's applicable to the rule.
Next.
Thank you. We've got a question from Matt Smile. Are the EIN decals still going to be required on the equipment? If the equipment has an EIN sticker but not a certificate, would enforcement still be able to look up that equipment's compliance?
So to your first question, yes, the EINs are still going to be required. We aren't planning to change like how the current, how it currently works. And I think the intent is that a vehicle would need to have this vehicle certificate, even if they already had an EIN. I know, I don't know if how far we want to get into it, but the intent is that they would have both the EIN and this vehicle level certificate in order to be allowed like on the job site.
So what this does is it helps the contractor or the public works agency that's managing the job site ensure that all the vehicles that are operating there are compliant with the regulation, because a vehicle could have an EIN but it may not be reported in an active fleet, and so they would need to have the vehicle level certificate, and so if they didn't have that, they were not reported in an active fleet even if it still had an EIN on it.
Thank you. We've got a comment from Doug Keller. Some suppliers will bring their own Gradall or forklifts to unload their trucks.
Okay, so that would be operating at the site. So you would then need to verify the fleet, the vehicle level certificate before it operated at the site.
Thank you. We've got a question from Jolene Fuentes. Would you consider a QR code?
I think that's an interesting idea. I think we can look into it. I think right now we were thinking of the certificates because it kind of follows the same procedure of the fleet-wide reported compliance certificates. I think that's a good idea and we can look into it.
Thank you. Another comment from Doug Keller. For a roofing company, this could be a great all there briefly loading materials on the roof.
Okay. I think it would still be considered operating on the site, on the job site, and would still need to be compliant with the regulation.
Okay, and we have another question from John Harris. He says, don't EINs prove that the vehicles are registered?
So Nathan, I'll take this. So what happens, John, is that someone had that vehicle and reported it at one time, and the vehicle was issued an EIN. If that fleet then sold that vehicle to another fleet, and then the next fleet did not report it into their fleet, the EIN may still be on the vehicle, but that vehicle may not be reported in an active fleet at that time. And we actually see this as quite common.
Thank you. We've got a question from Stephen Yang. Would these requirements apply to contractors who support private projects, i.e. not related to public works? If so, what obligation would the private awarding body have?
So I think in that scenario, if you are, prime contractor as we've defined, then you would be subject to these requirements. If it's for a private entity that's not using public funds, it's not under that definition of a public works awarding agency. I think our thinking at the moment is that would not be part of these requirements. So like in that scenario, the prime contractor would be responsible for the things that we've just discussed. Then the private entity who hired them, like I said, if it's not under that definition of a public works awarding body, would not be subject to this.
Thank you. We've got a question from Bob Sheppard. Industry is already doing what you're asking through screenshots of doors entry. To have a separate certificate would add a lot more complications to what is presently a very easy way of complying with a contractor.
So this is like early in development, so I'd be curious if like these screenshots of the doors, like what it is in doors, if that could be used for the same purpose. I don't know if others at ARB want to chime in, but I think that this is something we could look into if that's like something that's already being performed, and if that met our needs, maybe it's something we could consider. But I don't know if like Johanna or others would want to chime in.
Yeah, I think maybe Bob, when we get to when we're asking, maybe we can unmute Bob Sheppard right now and we can talk about this, because I think I need more clarification onto what he's talking about and what like phase of the project this is being done, and are they actually verifying the vehicles coming on site against that list for all of the vehicles coming on site. So I think if maybe Ruben, we can unmute Bob Sheppard if he's available, we can have a little bit more back and forth on that.
Yes,
You hear
Bob
me
is
okay?
unmuted.
Can you hear
Bob, are
me?
you there? Yeah, we can hear you. Thanks.
Okay. So, yeah, we have a whole lot of rental machines. And for example, the LAX project, we'll get calls and say, hey, please provide us the information that this vehicle is registered indoors and provide us a copy of the CARB executive order. So what we do is we'll go in, and indoors you have the opportunity to be able to put in an EIN and then search by that EIN. When you do that, it just brings up that specific item. We scroll down to that, make sure that it's totally on the screen, do a screenshot. We include that in an email and a copy of the executive order, and boom, they have everything that they need to know about that. Not only the EIN, but they know they can see your ID number, they can see all of the stuff that you have in there. And it prevents having to have all of these different certificates. I mean, we've been doing this for actually years with contractors on major projects, and it's become more and more prevalent.
So I don't know that the process we're talking about is actually that different than this. We would just be making it we would be codifying this for all projects, because I think what we were thinking is that rather than you having to go in and put it the EIN and bring up the information and do a screenshot, we would just have that certificate, or that essentially that screenshot with the relevant information already in the system, so you could just, you know, download the PDF and send it to your person. So I don't know that this is actually that different than what you're already doing, and it might actually save you some time because we'll already have it like kind of packaged for you.
Yeah, it just seems like a whole lot more setup from your end and trying to put PDFs together for all of this. And I'm telling you, it's very simple. You just punch in the EIN and you bring up the screenshot and you shoot it over. And it's either that or a certificate. And it seems like a certificate's going to be, you know, a lot more work on your end. And what happens if the certificate hasn't been put together? Your resources are still limited. So you might take a look at the whole system that is being used by public entities at the current moment. I mean, literally, you know, we do stuff or send something down in the ports are doing it the same way. And what we provide is devices to show that it is indoors. And like I said, they also get a copy of the CARB executive.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can definitely look into that. And, you know, perhaps what we do build in is like the process and the information that needs to be shared. And for the folks that do it your way, you can continue to do it your way. And maybe we have the PDFs for the folks that aren't doing it that way. So I appreciate that feedback. That's actually interesting that a similar process is already happening out there. So
I will send you an email.
Okay.
That will have an example.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
I had one quick follow-up out of curiosity. So like what happens now, you're saying, with these screenshots? Who traditionally is the one that's asking for this? Like, is it prime contractors asking for these screenshots of like their subs, or is it like the public works, or is it like other people that like we haven't really been talking about today? I'm just curious, like right now, what's happening and like who is asking for the screenshots?
Combination of everything and above. It's a subcontractor that is renting a machine from us. It may be direct. We do this not only for the off-road equipment, but we've also done screenshots and stuff like that of our perps and things like that. But that's just the front cover of that. But it's, yeah, I mean, it's any type of contractor, and it really is tied back into either the ports or to the public entities, just what you're looking at right here.
Okay.
I mean, there are private contractors that are also asking for the same because their contracts are asking for that.
Great. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. And I think maybe now we'll transition to see if people have their hands raised. There might be more written questions and I'll kind of alternate between them, but let's do some hands raised if there are any.
Yes, we have a raised hand from Cynthia Morris. You have been unmuted. Please state your full name and your affiliation. Cynthia, you have been unmuted.
How's that? Okay, my name is Cynthia Morris and I'm from Jordan Construction. I'm representing a contractor, and for us, I just wanted to say that I think it's a good idea to ask us for these certificates for off-road equipment. I already have it with truckers for my fleet for diesel trucks. I feel it's similar. It's separate from the snapshot or the screenshot that they were discussing. I feel that's, to me, a little extra. I would prefer a formal certificate like I get for my other trucks. And I also am a public works contractor, and it's CHP that is regulating us to have it in our office for up to 3 years. So that was a couple of things I had heard that I was commenting about.
Okay.
Thank you. Really good feedback.
Thank you.
We have another raised hand from Jerry Fernandez. You have been unmuted. Please unmute yourself and state your full name and your affiliation. Jerry, I don't think we can hear you right now. Okay, I think we're going to get back to Jerry later. Cynthia Morris has another question. You have been unmuted. Please unmute yourself and state your full name and affiliation.
Yes, Cynthia from Jordan Construction. I wanted to also say that as a public works, when I get hired by an awarding body, many times the contract will request, what equipment you're bringing. So I have plenty of time as the person who's getting the documents to provide those certificates if requested by you. So I think as contractors, we're supposed to already have it for our fleet on-road and off-road. And EIN numbers, like you mentioned, could be from another contractor. So it's good. They must have those. And I see many that don't, but we should have the inspectors actually on site looking at that. And then you can request the documents. I just think it's okay and fair to ask for that. That's all.
So I have one follow-up if you don't mind.
Yes.
So I'm curious if you ever hire subcontractors. Do
Yes.
you usually have those subcontracts in place before you're hired by the Public Works awarding body?
Usually, because it would be a bid, and so there's time to do that, unless it's a T&M and all of a sudden. But still, it's within time to request it from the contractor or the subcontractor or whoever's bringing equipment onto my site. We wouldn't want random people coming on anyway, so there's time to get it, and that just shows proof for the people who work hard to get these decals and documents and insurance and bonds. Give them credit, because there's plenty of people who don't have it and they get to roll in. So I think it's fair to ask, and that would help CHP too. And the main thing is about their opacity results and how much pollution they're putting out. And if they're old, there's too many old ones still running around. So I think it's good you're calling everyone out. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the feedback and answering my question.
Thank you.
We have another raised hand from Chris Jones. You've been unmuted. Please unmute yourself, state your full name and affiliation.
Jones, Los Angeles County Public Works. Just to follow up with some of the comments, we've been doing this for several years for public works projects here in Los Angeles County. We require this verification prior to mobilization to the job site. So generally, most of the public works contracts are 30 to 45 day move-in period, which gives the contractor, subcontractors, equipment rental companies time to get us that information. The challenge is when equipment needs to be replaced on a job site, either because it's damaged or needs maintenance. We basically require that information within 2 days of a backup piece of equipment being mobilized to the job site. So similar to what has been said, we verify EINs, executive orders, DOOR certificates. What would be very helpful, because due to environmental documentation, some of our projects require certain tier equipment, is if you issue either the certificate or modify the public lookup page to include the tier rating on the equipment, would be very helpful. Otherwise, we have to sort of cross-reference it back to the executive order issued by CARB to get the tier rating for that piece of equipment. But I'd be happy to share our specifications and our forms and databases with you for all the construction projects we have here in Los Angeles County.
Okay, thank you. That's really good feedback. Johanna, were you about to say something?
No, I just said that would be really helpful to know what they need to have on the certificates. I do have one question. Would any of the fleets out there like to comment on whether or not they would consider this information to be trade secret information that we could be putting on the certificates that they wouldn't want to have on their certificates, like tier rating or I don't, I think we were thinking like basic make and model information, but if any of the fleets want to raise their hand or put or write something into the question on whether or not that they would, what information they would consider private information, that would be helpful.
We do have a raised hand from Chris Jones. You've been unmuted. Please unmute yourself, state your full name and your affiliation.
Chris Jones again with Public Works. Just a reminder, this information is subject to Public Information Act. So in fact, I just got one for that information for our on-road verifications this week. So any information that's put on those certificates or on any screenshots or public lookup would be, the fleet owners need to be aware that that's open to public disclosure. And it's Public Works tries to redact personal information, but it's not always successful. So be careful what you put on your certificates, put it that way. Because we've had contractors and subcontractors concerned with how this information is stored, managed, and so, things like that. So there has to be some type of agreement that this information, how this data is going to be stored, managed, how long you're going to keep it, will it be destroyed afterwards. So there's a lot of concerns in the industry, both for the on-road and off-road information.
Thank you. That's really good feedback. And I think that kind of goes to Johanna's question too. If like right now we're developing this, so if there's thoughts on stuff that we should not be including on that certificate or is still useful, just any feedback on that is like from fleets, it would be really useful. And I think let's see if we can unmute, I think it was Jerry again, and then we'll go back to written comments. But I wanted to give another chance. I think Jerry Fernandez, I think it was.
Yes, Jerry, please unmute yourself. You've been unmuted. Please state your full name.
Seem to be having technical difficulties. If you'd like, well, so that you can either write in your question, we can try again too, like when I go back to questions again, or you can type in your question, or worst case, you can always send us an email if like there isn't a way to engage and we can have like a one-on-one. We'll try one more time and then I'll go to written questions and maybe we can try again. I'm not sure what the issue is, but.
Yeah, he's unmuted, but it looks like there might be some audio issues.
Okay. I think we'll go to written and then we'll maybe try again. I'll go back to hands raised. But for now, I think we'll see if there's more written questions.
Okay, we've got a comment from Sean O'Donoghue. It would be much easier for a large fleet such as tractors to have registration stickers similar to cars. Then when inspected, it wouldn't be as burdensome. The management should be on the state, not a private entity.
Okay, that's a good feedback to have.
Got a question from Nicole Quillen. For multi-year construction projects, will new certificates be issued each year following doors reportings per vehicle?
That is the intent at the moment. So, each year the doors DOORS gets updated, you have to have annual compliance. And then we were envisioning that this vehicle level certificate would get updated at the same time and then, issued in the same way as the fleet-wide annual compliance. So the intent was, yes, that each year the vehicles would get a new updated certificate of compliance.
Thank you. We've got a question from Jolene Fuentes. How would this affect rented or leased equipment? Who would be responsible for certification?
That is a very good question, and I think something we would like to delve into a little deeper, understanding sort of how that works. I think at the moment indoors, if you rent a piece of equipment for more than a year, then it is that fleet, it should be in their fleet in like indoors, so then they would have the vehicle level certificate. If it's rented for less than a year, I believe the rental facility, it is in their fleet. So when someone rents the piece of equipment, they would have the vehicle level certificate and would most likely give it to the entity that's renting it, if that makes sense. I don't know if Johanna, you had any thoughts, or hopefully I characterized the original rule correctly. But if anyone has any feedback on this, of like something where you see it would work or would not work for a rental fleet, definitely chime in now.
Yeah, I think we were hoping to get some feedback on how this might work for rental companies, if it needs to be something different outside of how the reg handles rental equipment now. We'd like that kind of feedback.
Yeah, I think we can
We
go.
have a question/comment by Matt Smiley. One issue I see for construction company equipment is that a lot of equipment is open cab and live and live in harsh environments. Paper copies may not survive. I like the QR option. Can other options such as this be further explored?
I think we're definitely open to exploring other ideas. One thing I wanted to note though is I'm not sure if the intent is to have like a paper copy on the vehicle itself and would stay on the vehicle. I think the intent is that, before something goes on the job site, the prime contractor would request from the fleet, like, give me your certificate of compliance, and then the prime contractor would just keep that record like somewhere not on the vehicle. So I don't anticipate all of these records being like housed in vehicles for long periods of time. Again, feel free to chime in, Johanna, if that is not correct. But I think that was our intent, is that this would be the prime contractor or the public works awarding body would request the record, and then they would just keep it in like a secure way.
Yeah.
All right, we have a question from Jerry Fernandez. Many contractors may have equipment on location from 3 of CARB's regulations. Will this lead to confusion?
So we do know that happens where, like one job site will have equipment that's covered under multiple regulations. I think, for the purpose of this regulation, this is something that would be helpful. I'm not sure if it would be too confusing. I mean, it sounds like fleets already have, on-road and off-road pieces of equipment, and they've been able to distinguish between them. But I don't know if maybe Johanna, you have any thoughts? But
yeah, I think probably the 3 regulations he's probably thinking about are truck and bus, off-road, and portable equipment. The portable equipment, they already have, they're supposed to actually have their registration paperwork with them. I don't think this is anything above and beyond that, but ultimately, I don't know how it's more, it's really up to the entities to know what regulations that they're subject to. And if they have questions, they can contact CARB. I'm not entirely sure where we think the confusion might come from, but if you want to kind of explain that a little bit further, we're welcome to dive in a little bit deeper if we have a specific concern. But I think, all of our programs have access points for fleets and the potential contractors who may be subject to these requirements to contact us and ask questions about a specific piece of equipment. So I think there's an avenue there for some dialogue. So if you want to explain a little bit further on where you think the point of confusion is, that would be very helpful.
All right, we have just kind of a follow-up from John Harris, another question. So these new certificates, will they come with my updated registrations, or would we have to resubmit the certificates for equipment that are already registered?
So I'm not sure what is meant by registration. I don't think off-road equipment, I'm not sure if that's referencing like DMV, but right now off-road is not registered. So this, I might want a little clarification of what's meant by registration. So right now, the fleets are in the DOORS database, and then like this would be issued like in the same way as the fleet-wide reported compliance. That probably doesn't answer the question, but I think I would need a little clarification about what is meant by registration. I don't know if Johanna.
No, I think it'd be best if maybe if John's willing to speak, if he wants to raise his hand, so we can unmute him, so we can get a little bit more clarification. That might be helpful.
You have been unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Because you have to register in DOORS and you get EIN numbers assigned to you. That is the registration I'm speaking of.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the intent is that all the vehicles that are currently registered indoors in a compliant fleet would automatically be issued these vehicle level certificates annually at the same time the fleet level certificate of reported compliance is issued now.
Gotcha.
So you wouldn't have to put the information into a new system. It would be using the same exact system that's already there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, next written comment or question.
Yeah, we've got a couple from Jerry Fernandez. I'll kind of go through them one by one. First one is, if my fleet meets requirements, aren't all of my equipment in compliance?
Yes.
Yes, and I think what we're trying to get at though is that we have had some instances where a fleet doesn't report all of their equipment to us. And so while their fleet is reported as compliant indoors, they actually own equipment that's not reported to CARB, and their fleet may or may not actually be in compliance when we factor that equipment in. So what we're trying to do is address that circumstance where there may be vehicles that are outside of the reported fleet indoors.
Yeah. So like if you have your whole fleet is registered indoors, your fleet is compliant, you're all good with the regulation, then all of the vehicles in your fleet will get this certificate and you're good to go. So like Johanna said, like we're trying to get at the fleets who like might not be reporting some of their equipment or like cases like that.
His next comment was, many of these producers require verification of CARB compliance on the annual contract review.
Okay.
And a follow-up question to that was, how long will the vehicle level certificates take to review?
I think that's a good question. Like if stakeholders have ideas, I mean, it kind of sounds like that process already happens a little bit, but I think our thinking is that we would provide these certificates and maybe stakeholders have feedback of how long they think it would take to, check the EINs and sort of review them. So I think that's more of a question actually for stakeholders to provide us if there are any thoughts on that. Because that is also another way this ties in is the understanding of the costs. And we are aware that, there is probably some additional labor costs related with reviewing it. So understanding what those implications are needs to be analyzed as part of this rulemaking process. Okay, next written question.
Thank you, Nathan. We have a question from Jennifer Schultz. Why are you making this only for public entities and not for all construction projects that use third-party equipment?
So I think a big part of the intent is that the prime contractor part of it should cover most construction sites. I think a part of the issue historically has been some of like the bigger job sites. It's been hard to kind of manage like with like several different subcontractors. So I think we see that as part of the problem, and targeting like prime contractors and public works awarding entities is sort of targeting that problem. I think a second reason is that public works are using public funds, so we want to ensure that those cases are using fully compliant equipment. So that I think is my answer, but I don't know if Johanna or others on the call have other.
Yeah, I think to be clear, this isn't excluding any private job sites. Any job site that has a contractor that meets the definition in that, I can't remember the businesses and professionals code, would be subject to this requirement. So it's in addition to the public works projects, it's any project that would have a contractor that meets this definition. The additional requirements for the public works awarding bodies is that those agencies that are awarding public works funds would also have to go through this process to make sure that all of those public works projects are following these requirements. So it's another level of review essentially. And it spreads the liability across more entities.
All right, we've got a question from Jolene Fuentes. Sorry, comment. We work in remote desert locations. If we need to have Wi-Fi to access these certificates, this could be very challenging for them.
That's a good comment. I think that's something we can look into. I'm curious if the prime contractors would do this activity while they're on the job site, or like when they're off site, wherever they like their headquarters are. Or so I think my question back would be, I'm curious of when they anticipate this activity to be performed, if it'd be on the job site in the desert or rural areas, or if they would request these certificates like prior to being out there. I mean, that's
Jolene,
oh, sorry, yeah.
She also added there are often last-minute equipment rentals and subs that take place that can cause difficulty in obtaining information with such a short window.
So I think what would be good to know is what would be an appropriate window for those types of situations and how we could clearly define those situations. Is a 2-day window, what would be kind of the appropriate time frame for doing this work if you can't get it ahead of time?
Thank you. We have a question from Freddie. Oh, great. What information does the EIN public info lookup provide?
I'm not sure if you know that off the top of your head, Johanna.
It's basic information on the vehicle, so the make and the model, engine make and model, and horsepower, and then whether or not it does not provide you who owns the vehicle, but it will tell you whether or not it's been reported in an active fleet and whether or not that fleet is compliant or not, or has been issued a certificate of reported compliance.
Thank you. We have a comment from Bob Sheppard. I would agree with the public works person. This is something about the public information. This is why CARB ultimately pulled the specific information that was originally being disclosed when looking into the public lookup. We have a couple different comments from Cynthia Morris. Tier information is too detailed for a certificate. It should be company and license number, how many in fleet, and Sorry, there are a couple different comments and questions, and there's quite a bit. She has her hand raised, so I don't know if maybe we want to.
We can go to hands raised, and either that person can speak up, or it'll give you time to kind of group them. But maybe she has her hand raised, and we can go to raised hands now.
Yeah, Cynthia Morris has her hand raised. Please unmute yourself. Please state your full name and affiliation.
Cynthia Morris, Law Construction. I'm sorry, there was no way to get through, and I just wanted to say, as far as the certificate, on truckers, it doesn't have all the information you guys were discussing. Like they said, it's just the basic company license number, how many vehicles it gives us, but what it gives you guys is that it's current, it's for that year. So I do think it's important, and all the stuff about asking where it's kept and how to provide this info when it's so quick. I think I'm missing that part, because on all of our jobs, whether it's public or private, and if I have equipment, I already, in order to use that equipment, I have to already be registered indoors, EIN, insurance, bond. So I feel like it's not, it's okay to ask us to provide the certificate, and then who inspects it and who asks? It's CHP. They come into our office every year and they look and ask for these certificates. And for truckers, it's for every truck, plus the main certificate and opacity test and DMV and motor carrier. So for you guys, it would only be my opacity test and the door certificate. And if you want to add an individual one for each equipment, I think it's great, because from there it's going to show the tier levels and if they're compliant or not. And that's based on the year of the engine. So I just feel like there's a lot of in and outs. And I'm remote, I'm on Catalina Island. So that's why this whole Wi-Fi question too, I'm confused by that, because I would already annually only as a compliance administrator, I do it once a year. And then I take the time and I get each certificate for each equipment. You know, if I have 3 or 300, that takes time, but that's part of owning a company that has equipment, especially on a public works job. And if you have insurance, you have to have it. So I just wanted to add that.
That's really good feedback. So I appreciate that. One thing I just wanted to mention really quickly is I don't believe there's opacity requirements for off-road equipment. I just want to
under truck, bus, and regulation, I believe it is.
Well,
Yeah,
truck and bus covers other equipment.
Yes, for truck, bus, and regulation, for my diesel regular fleet, heavy duty, and then off-road on my John Deere, it is required. And that's why I'm saying it's not asking too much, because I'm already having to provide that when CHP inspectors come in. I just open the folder for each room, and the girls, they all go through it, and there you go. And once they see it and your certificates, they pretty much, and the EIN's numbers match, they can cross-reference that, but then it looks legit, and it is, and that keeps it simple, I believe.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And that's part of why, you know, it sounds like our concept is, you know, in a good spot, because I think we had the same thoughts. So I appreciate your feedback. Next hand raised.
We have a raised hand from Bob Sheppard. You have been unmuted. Unmute yourself. Please state your full name and your affiliation.
Bob Sheppard with Quinn again. So I did send the email to you. We actually also do you can go in the edit screen. And from there, you can go in and print that screen out. And some of our public works say, hey, that's better because it has the California seal at the top. They want to see that. So I gave you both methods. There was a question earlier about rental. We are a rental. I mean, that's all of our equipment, and it's retained rental.
Oh no, we lost Bob.
We seem to have lost your audio.
Bob.
Still there?
Oh, you're there now, I think.
Okay, so where did I leave off?
Rental.
So rental, we are rental. We've got 2,500 pieces that could be asked for at any one time. And they're in our fleet because we own them. Once we sell them out of the fleet or whatever, then it's up to that contractor to transfer the EIN. So at any rate, we are the holders of that information. It's up to the subcontractor or the contractor to ask for the information, which we give to them, and then they keep it on the file as long as it's on the job site. Now, I mean, the certificate, if CARB is willing to have this certificate out there and available, you click on, you know, a link and it brings you up to this thing. I can see where, you know, you could get it faster. It just seems like it's a whole lot more complication if those certificates aren't there. And so quick way for us is using the screenshot.
So Bob, while you're unmuted, is there any information, getting back to what we were had mentioned earlier about the information being, oh gosh, what was the word? Subject to PRA. So is there any information you would not want on a certificate, or that you feel, you know, because right now you're providing the full screenshot, which has like all the detailed information on that vehicle. Like, is that necessary to have all of that information, or is there information specifically that you guys would not want to have? Would you consider it confidential or business confidential?
Yeah, it's so, I can't remember all of it, but I mean, if somebody was to be able to go in and pull up all of our information on all of our machines by just simply saying, okay, we know what their ID number is, here, we want the information, we wouldn't want that. The reason with the screenshots that we do or the printouts that we do, I guess that could be publicly pulled specifically through, say, LAXT or whatever, whoever the contractor was doing it, but it's not something that somebody can go to the Air Resources Board and get. So it'd be specific to that job. It's probably better left at that from a confidentiality standpoint than something that would identify our ID number, identify our company name, and you know, compared to the machine itself. So that would be, I don't know. I mean, if we did like we did when we did the trucker survey, and I put a nice little confidentiality statement in there. If we were able to do that, then maybe the stuff couldn't be publicly pulled. I mean, that's something you have to talk to your lawyers about, because I know that it was specifically pulled because there was more information on the public lookup than people wanted to have out there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. We have a raised hand from Cynthia Morris. You've been unmuted. Please unmute yourself and state your full name and affiliation.
Yes, Cynthia Morris, Jordan Construction. I wanted to say that I'd suggest that you would look at the trucker certificate as far as the kind of information on it, and then I'll leave that. As far as your motive for all of this is mainly to have clean engines and get all the old equipment off, right? And have everyone account for their equipment. Is that what we're trying to do?
Well,
At a base level, yes.
Yes, right. And then to have proof that this vehicle has been registered, when I say registered, it's been reported indoors. So I think that even if it's a rental, like I said before, if I own the equipment, I have all this information already. I must have it for CHP when they inspect me. So is there someone else that you're asked, like, is going to be inspecting for this? Or I'm missing that point. Who is it that's you're doing this for? For CARB? For CHP?
So yeah, so we do have CARB enforcement that does go out into the field and does do inspections at job sites, and so they would there would be a disclosure provision that the whoever is at the job site would need to disclose this information to CARB when requested. So the other part of it is also to ensure, I don't know if you caught this part of Nathan's presentation, is that when the prime contractor receives these certificates, if a vehicle does not have this certificate, it cannot operate at the job site. So it would essentially be shutting down. The proposal would be that these vehicles could not operate at these job sites. So that's kind of the second part of it, is that these vehicles would not be able to access the job site.
And I think as a public works contractor and a private contractor, that's not asking too much, because I have to have it all anyways. When I'm, public works contracts, the awarding bodies, they could be asking for that information, that certificate, which would then when you go deeper into it, would provide all that information that I could find on the DOORS website. So I don't think it needs to go deeper than that, other than that each equipment has been reported and that you can provide that. I provide my information months, like they say, 30 days, 60 days before a job even starts. So I don't understand why it's such a, if it's done once a year in by March, then I should have all of that information already in my office, in my files, so that whoever asks me, I can provide it at any time. And if equipment breaks down and someone brings a new equipment, well, that piece of equipment, if I'm doing billing, I already know about it and it has it already. So I should be able, there's time to always provide that to the contractor or the inspector. They always give you time to the contractor to provide it. So if they got it, they have time to provide it. So I wouldn't be afraid to ask for it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good feedback.
Thank you, Cynthia. We're gonna, we have a raised hand again from Jerry Fernandez. We're gonna mute you. Please state your full name and your affiliation. It looks like there's continuous audio issues. We're going to go to the next question. The raised hand from Chris Jones. You've been unmuted. Please unmute yourself. Please state your full name and your affiliation.
Hey, Chris Jones, Los Angeles County Public Works again. To the previous comments, yeah, I think everyone on this webinar are responsible contractors. And I was amazed when we started implementing this voluntary verification a couple of years ago, how many small contractors had never heard the term doors before, and how much equipment was actually operating in California that didn't have EIN numbers. I was flabbergasted. So I think this helps codify it and almost brings a level playing field to all the contractors out there in terms of bidding projects. Also, to codify this requirement, right now, the county and other agencies voluntarily do this and maybe not do it on all jobs. But this would help codify it, which would help someone like me out in terms of going to management or the board to say this needs to be done, because now it's a regulation. It's not, it's going to be a requirement instead of just a voluntary action by Public Works and other state agencies. So I think that's very helpful if it can be codified and you get more consistent enforcement verification throughout the state.
Okay, thank you. I did have a follow-up. When you, about how many, like just overall, like the size of the fleets that you work with on your projects, are they primarily like, do you have larger and small, or do you have, I know like LA Metro, they have like a whole like small business focus. Like, I don't know if some of the other public works agencies also.
Yeah, I've worked for Caltrans, Metro, and Los Angeles County. The focus is bringing in small disadvantaged businesses, which sometimes they only own a couple pieces of equipment. They may not be familiar with these regulations or have the resources available to them to understand these regulations. So that's where many public works and Metro has all these outreach programs to help educate them. We help get them registered on doors or truckers and things like, and help them with compliance. But for like public works, we go from, contractors who have fleets of hundreds and hundreds of vehicles or pieces of equipment and vehicles to just someone who just maybe doesn't own anything and just rents and leases it. So, or they own one tier one piece of equipment they've had for 20 some odd years now.
Okay. No, that's good information. And I'd like to put a plug in if you need help with any of your outreach. We have done some trainings with LA Metro, and my staff are always willing to help do some trainings and outreach with the small businesses.
Yeah, right now we've been focused a lot on the on-road stuff and working with James Goldstein and crew with and they've been very helpful getting our on-road program on board. So I was glad to see the off-road, also participating in this.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And we have another raised hand from Cynthia Morris. You've been unmuted. Unmute yourself and please state your full name and your affiliation.
Cynthia Morris, Jordan Construction. I wanted to say that with the public works contracts, that would be great that you request that from us contractors to provide that information by us. That would be just one more thing that we would be doing, and we have the folder for that with the answer. So I think that would be fine. And then as far as I wanted to say something again with the certificates, I think it's a good idea because of that whole Wi-Fi scenario. You shouldn't even be dealing with that. And then third, for me, the CHP is the one that's verifying everything. So and as far as the equipment and what he said about the small companies, we are a small company, and CHP will come to Catalina and they come find us, and I'm always compliant to make sure. So I feel like it's okay to go out and ask and have that information and ask for the information and make us provide it. And especially on public works job, you can't have the job if you don't have the legal equipment. It's not fair to the people that do it all right. So I just wanted to add that to my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a big part of it too, that I'm glad others are referencing too. Having a level playing field is a big part of it too, is, all the people who are doing the right things and have compliant fleets and equipment,
Well, that's the frustration. That's the frustration for us that work so hard to do it. So by making us have to go one more level, which it's not really asking much, we already have the info on all the equipment indoors. So you just get a certificate for each one and you add it to everything else that's in your drawer, and it's there for the year. Let everybody roll in and ask for it. But then it shows that your vehicles are at the right tier level. And anything under, I thought this was all kind of resolved because 2010 was the deadline. So I kind of find it funny, like we're hesitating to call them all out, and I don't know. It just,
well,
I wouldn't feel.
You might be thinking of truck and bus, which I'm less familiar with, but the off-road diesel regulation, so they're like fleet average targets, and the targets are in 2023 for large and medium is their final fleet average target, 2028 for small fleets. So that the off-road diesel regulation for off-road equipment is still like currently ongoing, and the fleets are currently cleaner.
Well, that's fine for the engine, but that still would give me a certificate for each vehicle, and the one overall for the whole company saying that we're compliant for the year, not just for that vehicle. So either way, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another question from David Schmid. You have been unmuted. Unmute yourself. Please state your full name and your affiliation.
So I'm David Schmid with Echo Equipment. I think there seems to be some confusion between having all your vehicles properly registered, reported to doors, and being able to provide the certificate on short notice at the job site, which might be remote. Those are two different challenges. I think everyone would agree with Cynthia that everyone's should have their ducks in a row well in advance of trying to deliver any vehicle. But if it's done on short notice, or if there's a substitution or something, it might be difficult to provide a certificate from the driver or to who's going to be on site to receive it. That kind of logistical problem, that's a concern I have.
So kind of, I think from an earlier comment, Johanna had asked this, but like, is there a certain amount of time that stakeholders think would be reasonable for this? Like, I think we would like feedback of like, if we could write something in here that's like, you have, X number of days or so I think like understanding what would make it more accommodating and more realistic if stakeholders had feedback on that, that'd be really good to hear.
And I think I want to add that, David, that the idea would be that you would get an electronic version of the certificate, and so you could actually submit that electronically to the company that you're doing that work for, so they have some kind of, and whether or not they print it or they have it stored electronically is kind of up to them. That's something we'd have to work out in the record keeping provisions, but that they would have been submitted this vehicle certificate, they would review it, verify that that was the vehicle that you did deliver to them, whether it was on short notice or not. But that it wouldn't be something that you had to like have in the vehicle and transfer at that point. If you chose to do it that way, that's something that you could do, but that there would also be an electronic version of the certificate that could be processed that way.
Yeah, obviously electronic or digital delivery would be good. I don't want to speak for anyone else on the call, but as far as what time period would be adequate for delivering the certificate, but I would think probably 48 hours should be adequate. I mean, working, well, not counting a weekend.
Business days. Okay, thank you. That's good feedback.
Okay, thank you, David. We do not have any more raised hands at this time.
Okay, we'll go back to the written comments.
I have a statement from Harmony Gates. The rental statement from earlier did not sound correct for over 1 year. Equipment rentals for more than a year are still the owner's responsibility unless it's written on the contract to move the obligation.
Okay.
So Harmony, if you have a suggestion or have some comments about whether or not this process would not work for rental vehicles, I think we're interested to understand if there's any concerns with that. So if you have some comments on that, we'd be interested in hearing them.
All right, we've got a question from Jennifer McMillan. How does this apply to public agencies such as cities and municipalities with our own fleet?
So I think it would apply the same way. I mean, so like if a public entity had its own fleet that was doing like a public work projects, I'm assuming they would have the fleet-wide compliance certificates and the vehicle certificates themselves. So they would like have their own records in that situation. So I think it would apply, and I think they would just have the records of their own fleet, and then that, like everything else would apply in the same way, unless I'm misunderstanding the question. So feel free to like add to that question if that didn't answer it. But my thinking is that, if someone had, like if a public entity has their own fleet, then they, have the records themselves and they would comply in that way.
Thanks, Nathan. Next question from John Harris. Do you still have to register indoors and get EIN numbers?
Yes, so like the current process of how a fleet, registers indoors, and that whole process will stay the same. The new piece is that then there will be a certificate through doors provided to the fleets for the vehicles as well. So like the current process is staying the same, and then there would just be this additional certificate that is issued to the fleet when it's registered. So EIN process is the same, registration indoors is the same.
Yeah, we aren't proposing any changes to the current requirements regarding reporting of the vehicles and the annual reporting for the fleets.
Thank you. We've got two questions here by Diana Brink. How frequently does that happen? And out of the quantity of vehicles in use, what is the percentage?
This might need to be clarified. I don't know like when this question was written in terms of what it's referencing. So I don't know if either can you like clarify a little bit more in the comments, or if you want to be like raise your hand if you want to ask the question verbally. But I'm just this might have been like a written comment from some time in the past, and I'm not sure what it's referencing.
Yeah, she's got her hand raised.
Okay, we can go to her hand raised then, Ruben, if that works.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Diana. Go ahead and unmute yourself to speak. Diana, be sure to click the red mic icon.
Yeah, it took a second to kick in. This is Diana Brink. I'm the Purchasing Division Manager for Turlock Irrigation District. And my question was about 15 minutes ago, so I'm sorry it doesn't seem relevant now. When you had mentioned that the reason why you're putting in these additional checks and balances is because you find out occasionally that equipment is non-compliant. So how often does that actually happen on a public works job, and in what percentage of all the vehicles or equipment that are in play in public works jobs? Are we trying to go after, you know, a rare occurrence or something that's happening habitually?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if maybe Aaron, you wanted to chime in about any feedback. So I don't know off the top of my head exactly what those numbers are. I do know that those occurrences happen, and I'm not sure if others, like, I just personally don't have that information off the top of my head.
We do have enforcement reports that are issued every year in June of each year, and we can put a link into where those are located, and they actually have the enforcement statistics that we that come up every year. So we can provide you those reports. I don't know that we can talk about, you know, percentage statewide, because we aren't actually able to go actually see every single vehicle out there. So I don't know that that's an appropriate reference. But I will put into the handouts. Maybe that's not the right place. I don't know if I can put a URL in there. Do you know if I can put a?
I think there's a way for us to send chats out, right?
Okay. I'll try to find a way to send a chat out with the link to the enforcement, where the enforcement reports are found on ARB's website.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm asking is for us being such a small district, when we release our projects to a PM, we have no way from the procurement side to monitor whether or not the persons that are coming on site are compliant. We get the compliance when we release the documents. And so, you know, if they switch out equipment or equipment shows up on the job site, I'm thinking this is going to be an additional level of employees that we would have to have manage that, and also cross-training in many different departments with many possible project managers. So for a small district, this could be very burdensome.
Okay, so if there was a way, if like we allowed you to include language that in like your contract with these entities, that they would then, you basically pass along this these requirements to them, and then they would then report back to you on some period of time. So they would just report back to you this information that you would then need to have. And then, I mean, is that something that could be workable for you?
And that's a lot of the same types of languages we put in our contracts going forward, as we put the onus onto the contractor or the subcontractor to comply. But we don't necessarily ever go back and audit those jobs.
So what if they had what if we included that they needed to have an obligation to submit that information to you? And so then you would get that information automatically, because that would be
Right.
part of the requirement. So you
So, yeah, I'd have to talk to our legal to see if that would compel them to maybe not get their last 5% of retention or something like that, you know, because
well,
if you don't have,
so some of this would have to happen earlier, right? It wouldn't necessarily be all at the end. Like the requirements would still be when they are, and then these entities would then just be, as they're collecting the information at the time that they have to, they would be passing it along up to you. And so essentially we would be telling you as an agency, you have these requirements. How you go about making it work for you is kind of on you. If you want to pass that along, that obligation to your contractors, but then you would then be required to, you know, verify on your end that you are getting the information when it's.
yeah. What are you thinking as far as penalties for anybody who is in non-compliance?
I put into the chat the enforcement reports. I can also put into the chat the link to our enforcement policy. And so you can look and see what our enforcement policy is, because it would be the same for this as it is for, you know, the rest of the regulations that ARB enforces.
Okay, that's good. I'll pass that on to the general attorney too.
All right,
thank you.
Go ahead. I'll add that in.
Okay, we have a raised hand from Harmony Gates. You have been unmuted. Unmute yourself. Please state your full name and your affiliation.
Hi, it's Harmony Gates with York Engineering. You kind of referred back to my rental feedback from earlier on. I don't think the status of whether the unit is rented or not really matters in the scope of what you're doing. If a contractor is going to bring a piece of equipment, it shouldn't matter whether it's rented or owned by that contractor. They would have to provide proof of compliance, that whatever is being provided is compliant in the eyes of what you guys are after. So you would ask if I had any feedback on that. And then I think the part for me, I'm a consultant. I help a wide variety of clients. I'm still not clear based on some of the definitions you provided who this is going to apply to. So I understand when it's a public works or one of those big bid projects that you're kind of going after, those public fleet type of projects. It's just not really clear to me yet if it's going to apply to any of these private industries and whether or not you would move that direction, just like the truck and bus rule says that CARB wants you to police it down to whoever you hire. That's how I originally assumed you guys were working on this, but if it's strictly to public works awarding bodies, that's where I'm.
So I think the prime contractors part of the applicability kind of gets to more of those other situations. So we looked into what a prime contractor, how we would define it, and like if they have to have a license pursuant to this, then jobs that would hire a person like that, then like they would be covered in this situation, and the prime contractor would have to do these checking of the vehicle level certificates. So I don't if you have thoughts on
I guess what does that mean? I guess I'm not familiar with Chapter 9, Division 3 business code. Is that what kind of license? In a layman's term right now, I have no idea what that means. I don't know how many of my clients have to have this license.
I see what you're saying. So Johanna, I don't know if you remember or if you will want to chime in, but we worked on this, and like this section of the code had like a definition of like contractors for construction.
So I would suggest that you actually go look up this this part of the professions code, and we can definitely, what I'm hearing is that we need to do some additional work on this to explain it a little bit better. So I appreciate that, Harmony, but the intent here is that it would essentially hit anyone who has to have a license through the Contractor State Licensing Board. And if you have to have that license to get hired for a job, then that you would then be subject to this regulation. So the person who is the entity that has the prime contract with whoever the hiring entity is the one that would be responsible for this. So any job that requires a license through CSLB is the level of job that would be required to comply with these provisions. I hope that can explain it a little bit more.
I think so. It has more to do with a company that typically is doing contracted work.
Yes, yeah.
So it's not for companies that hire contractors. It's for those who are typically in the contracted business. So that does help a lot. And yes, of course, I would look into this definition more. I think you would, it might be beneficial at some stage to give examples, like when you do an FAQ document or something that might end up being helpful for you. But nonetheless, this was the first time I saw that definition, so I appreciate it, and I will look up the code.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's good feedback.
Thank you, Harmony. We have a raised hand from David Schmid. You have been unmuted. Unmute yourself. Please state your full name and your affiliation.
David Schmid with Echo Equipment. I heard a really good question a little bit ago regarding how serious a problem it is of having vehicles with EINs that are not actually properly registered currently. I think it would be very important, imperative, maybe for the CARB to know that if the whole basis of this new rule is to solve that problem, a better understanding of how material the problem is would be very good to know. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment.
Thank you, David. We have a raised hand from Chris Jones. You have been unmuted. Unmute yourself and please state your full name and affiliation.
Chris Jones with Los Angeles County Public Works, and David with Echo, thank you. He's one of the contractors we deal with, or the equipment brokers we deal with, that gives us all this information in a very timely manner. So his input would be greatly valued in this process, because we've had several projects with him now that he's been able to provide that information to us prior to the job even getting started. And if they had to replace equipment, he got it almost the same day to us. And as like the lady earlier said, you already have that information on site. But verifying this equipment at the beginning is like, I believe, I can't remember her name, from Turlock Irrigation District, is only half the problem. How are you knowing that that equipment is the actual equipment that actually shows up? Because I can sit there and approve equipment prior to job. I get a list of equipment. I send it to the CM or the project manager. But that's the biggest challenge, is to verify what the contractor, equipment broker, subcontractors actually bring out to the job site. Is the biggest concern that we have. And right now we require the inspector or CM in their daily logs to basically verify that equipment, because they have to produce a daily log and just put a list of equipment, and then it goes back to headquarters, basically, where we verify it on the list that that equipment actually was the stuff that was approved. So just pre-approving equipment is only half the problem. It's the follow-up that's always the most cumbersome.
Okay. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah, it's a good comment. So it sounds like there's like a, every entity is going to probably have their own way to figure it out, how it works for them. And it's a good to hear the feedback that there are certain, there are people out there doing it now, and you guys all have different methodologies for doing that. So we would, I think the intent is that we wouldn't be so prescriptive that we would tell you how to implement the requirements, but you would just be responsible for making sure that they happen.
Okay, we have a raised hand from Cynthia Morris. You've been unmuted. Unmute yourself. Please state your full name and your affiliation.
Cynthia Morris, Jordan Construction. I wanted to comment about the lady with the purchasing department. As a contractor, I think that's a good idea about, about holding the, for billing, holding out a little bit until they provide it. But before that even happens, when we work in LA County or LBUSD, in order to bid on a public works job, I already have to provide all, maybe not so much this, the off-road equipment, because that's something you're adding to it, hopefully, because I think it is important. But I'm already providing all this other information. Why not just add that? And I am the person, I am the one who does the follow-up and goes when a foreman says, hey, there's a new excavator came on site and I asked for that EIN number, I will go sit down and go look them up. And it is part of the job. It is part of the requirement. So I think it's okay to ask the contractor to be responsible for any equipment, especially because they're going to do billing on it. They're getting paid for it. So in order for a contractor to compete with other contractors who might not be reporting, this would be a way to call them out, and only people who qualify and have certificates and all the information are allowed to actually bid. And it states that for us under LBSD requirements. So I feel like it's in place in some areas apparently, and that's why I feel like we've been doing it. So by all means, do it across the board. It would help the small company like us. That's it. I think I just wanted to say that we have to pre-qualify, and this would just be part of it. If you're bringing in off-road equipment, what's the difference between that and my cement truck or my 10-wheeler? It's still equipment. It's still a public works job. Still public money. There's plenty of time to get that info, I think. And I'm the contractor, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again.
All right, thank you, Cynthia. We do not have any more raised hands at this time.
Okay, we'll go back to written comments.
Yeah, we've got a question from Nicole Quinlan. When new certificates get issued for multi-year construction projects, will the certificates have new numbers? If so, how soon would the new certificate numbers be provided? Should the new certificate be requested by CARB?
So I think the certificates would have like an effective date. So like it would be like this, was issued like, or I mean, we haven't figured out like all the specifics, but it might say something like this certificate was issued March 1, 2024 and is good until like the February, whatever, it'll have some like effective date for like that yearly compliance. And if by numbers, you mean like the EIN numbers, that would not be changing really. So like annually you'd get a new certificate and the certificate would say for like what year that's valid for. Hopefully that answers that question. So you just need a new certificate. You wouldn't need to do like extra number changes or anything like that. Just have a new certificate.
You would still need to complete your annual reporting and submittal of the responsible official affirmation of reporting, the ROR, because that is the action that gives you your certificate of reported compliance, which then is what allows us to issue the vehicle level certificate. So there is still a series of events that would need to happen because we're not proposing to change those other requirements. And so there still would be annual reporting, there still would be submittal of the ROR, and then annually at the same time that the RORs are issued or the certificates of reported compliance are issued, then we would also issue updated certificates, vehicle certificates, lots of certificates. You might need a better name for them.
And that's all like how it currently is implemented, and we wouldn't be changing that. So like the whole ROR reporting process is the same, right, Johanna?
Yes, we aren't proposing any changes to that.
Thank you. Cynthia Morris actually had a follow-up to that, and maybe you guys can clarify. why are there new numbers? It's just the current year, just like truckers.
Yeah, I think that answers, we're saying that that is correct. It's just the new year. It wouldn't be new numbers.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Roy Rutherford. Does CAR plan on charging a fee for the equipment certificate?
We haven't really discussed it. I don't think the intent is to have a fee, but I don't want to say that because we haven't actually talked about it. Johanna, I don't know if you have.
Yeah, it's not something that we've considered at this point, but I would not take that off the table. We don't currently charge a fee for issuing an EIN. So I don't, it wasn't our intent at this point to charge a fee for this issuing this vehicle level certificate.
Thank you. So we have a question by John Harris. Federal job sites require this information. So to clarify, we are talking about the only real change is that there will be requirement for vehicle certificates.
So I'm not entirely sure what the federal reference was about, but the intent is that the main difference with these new requirements is that there would be these vehicle certificates, and then the requirements on the prime contractors and the public works awarding entities would be like getting and reviewing these levels, these vehicle level certificates. So I think the answer is yes, that is the main difference here, are those vehicle level certificates. But if there's any clarification, like if that didn't quite answer the question, feel free to write back in, because I'm not sure what the reference to federal jobs meant exactly.
Thanks,
He does have his hand. He does have his hand raised. I don't know if you want that.
We can unmute him. Yeah.
I was asking that quite a few statements back about having the reason for having the certificate. You have to, on a lot of federal projects, provide proof of your equipment, and have since, at least on PERP, I've been dealing with this since day one, back in 2008 or whenever it started, I can't remember. But yeah, you had to have proof of your registration for a hydraulic power unit or a generator and that type of thing. That's what that statement was regarding. The other was just a simple question. The changes we are discussing today are merely a new document to provide to entities or general contractors running a large project that request that.
Yes, and I think a big part of it too is, like you had mentioned PERP, but so I think we're kind of like this is for, off-road diesel equipment, and right now, like, it's not part of those requirements. So like part of it is adding it to, like, it sounds like it'd be a similar process to what you described with federal, but we're expanding it to the off-road diesel regulation and to more than just federal projects. So, prime contractors and any public works awarding. So I think it's like broader than just federal projects, but it sounds like the process is similar in terms of now there's a vehicle certificate that they would be checking.
Yeah, yes, I was just using PERP as an example because I know a contractor that got shut down and kicked off the job for failure to be compliant and have the certificates.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm in all three programs, so thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, I think we'll go back to written questions if there were more written comments.
Yeah. We have a question from John Braden. Can the public lookup tool be utilized to provide the certificate?
I don't think we've thought about that. I think it's something we could look into, but I'm not sure if we wanted to make many changes to that public lookup tool. I don't know if Johanna, you had thoughts, but I think it makes sense to have it with the doors. So then just the fleet is the one who's receiving this certificate, like through the doors system. But I don't know if Johanna, you had other thoughts.
Yeah, I think the intent was that only the fleet would have access to all of their fleet level or their vehicle level certificates, and it would be up to the contractor of the public works awarding body to collect the vehicle level certificates from the fleet based on which vehicles they'd be operating at the job site. So I want to make sure that we're careful that we don't kind of go into that place where we had kind of talked about earlier, where we are giving out CBI, where we're giving out everyone's fleet information. I don't think that would be a very popular maneuver on our part. So the intent wasn't necessarily that the public information lookup would be the place for this information.
Thanks, Johanna.
Thank you. We have a question from Freddie Ugrate. Does CARB have an MOU with CHP to enforce off-road diesel regulation?
So I think that's actually a good point, where I'm not sure if CHP currently I think that they focus on road. I don't want to speak for CHP or enforcement, but I think CHP focuses on road, and this is talking about off road. So I don't think an MOU exists, and I'm not sure exactly to what level CHP enforces like off road, if at all. There again, I don't know if you have something else to add, Johanna, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, so my understanding is that CHP does not enforce the off-road regulation. Oh.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I didn't know for sure, so I don't want to.
Thank you. We've got a question from Jennifer McMullen. What topic will be discussed at the next public workshop, and when will that be scheduled?
Yeah, so I can give a little. So we're planning to have one more working group. That's the topic will be focused on costs of the entire amendment package. So much broader than just these additional requirements to contractors. But it'll be focused around like the cost analysis, and we'll discuss like potential incentives and how they overlay with like the amendments in off-road diesel. So, and that we're planning for towards probably the beginning of October, maybe late September, but most likely early October for that work group. And then the next workshop, which will cover like the entire concept and like a lot more detail and solidified concept and language, that workshop will be, there again, we're aiming towards the end of November for that workshop. So part of that we will be, this will be a piece of that, this contractors and public works discussion. But that workshop will cover like the whole amendment package. And then there'll be more process after that. But those are our next two major public meeting touch points. And then also a side note too, make sure that if you are interested in those, that you sign up to the email list for the in-use off-road diesel rule, so you get notifications of those public meetings. So if you're interested, or if you want to make sure that you sign up for those, you can sign up for our email list. Also, one other thing that I didn't get to yet, I was saving it for the end, but I'll just leave this on the screen, but it's contact information. So if you have any questions about this amendment process, you can send it to the ORD amendments at arb.ca.gov. And I brought it up in case you aren't sure how to sign up for the email list, you can send an email to this as well. So I'll just leave this on the screen for now. Okay, next written comment, Amber.
Thanks, Nathan. We have a comment from Jerry Fernandez. You may see the local air district for 2-engine vehicles.
Is this in reference to also the portable engines? I'm not sure.
It's not clear. That was
Okay.
the only comment there.
And I think that's what we've been having audio issues with. So.
Yeah.
I might be misremembering, but I feel like we had audio issues with this person in a previous work group too. I'm not sure what is happening. I feel bad, but like I said,
Sorry, he just said inspections, referring to inspections.
Are you saying like the air districts inspect the 2-engine vehicles?
Oh, do you want to try him on the
We can
phone?
try unmuting him again.
Unmute him and see if he can get it to work.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Boy, wow, I have 3 different computers open.
So sorry, I don't know.
What I was trying to get at is 2 engine vehicles that are registered indoors, you still have to register the second engine and portable equipment. So portable equipment, local air districts will come out and inspect that equipment, and they do that opacity look and see if it's producing anything that's beyond what they believe should be for that engine, right? So those may be the inspectors that other people are talking to. CHP doesn't come off-road. You may see your local air districts requiring a proof of test. And as a matter of fact, you have to submit with your perp stuff that you will open yourself to those inspections. And each air district will inspect, depending on the number of equipment, up to 15% of your equipment annually. So that's for the other one. Yeah, I have a whole bunch that I wrote down, but what type of training are we going to be able to get out to your awarding contractors and your prime contractors to educate them? Because doors does mix 2 different regs, and you're gonna have a truck that may be registered, a truck coming in, like for my instance, I'll have truck and bus on location, I'll have doors on location, I'll have portable equipment on location. For the layman, that is very, very confusing. And if they're expecting a certificate for each piece of that equipment, that's not going to happen. You will have only a doors certificate. You'll have a truck and bus annual, hey, we met the annual, and portable equipment, you have your plate, but that just says, hey, we're going to be able to you can run this equipment until, December 31st of 2024, and then it has to swap out. You have your registration for perp. So I just want to make sure that in this whole planning process, we put together some good training. You guys have some really good training out there for people to understand the different regs. This may be something we should focus on, because I'm a prime works contractor. I truly believe that you guys are going to have to work Department of Industrial Relations for, they're the one that issue you a prime works contractor number. So that would tie right in together, that, when you get a number issued to you, in that questionnaire, it could be, can you give us your doors ID number for certification? Or could you do that? That might be something that you guys could work internally. The other thing I know that people were confused with, or at least I think they were confused with, was that Chapter 9, that's actually the law portion of the test for the contractor's license. That's your business and professional license test, and you should be aware of all that if you passed your contractor's license. So that's all in that together. I think this is probably a good idea. I'm a little concerned that the length of time it might take us to, so I have a whole bunch of equipment already in your doors site. So how do I get to that? I mean, how long is it going to take you once we get this going to be able to upload all those certificates? Or, is it going to be when we hit that button to get your certificate now, it says print all your certificates, something that gives you, hey, everything that's compliant is, I can print you a certificate now, and then we could stow that away for that annual period, right? I think that's probably a process that we could look at. But other than that, everything that I've seen in here, I think is pretty applicable, and I don't see a problem. I don't want everyone having my information, but when doors ID numbers are available, a public can't see all my different equipment in there. I would have to provide that. So, that's the way I look at it. We would only be disclosing stuff that's out there, but I'm a little bit different than probably most of these contractors, but I am also concerned about the small guy that may only have one piece of equipment that currently doesn't have his stuff indoors. So that would be, your truck shops that you used to conduct for truck and bus maybe we need to do something similar for diesel off-road, where you go to an area, you put out the notice, and your trainer comes and says, hey, if you have a single backhoe and you're doing work for the water agencies, we need you to register your piece of equipment, and we'll teach you how to do it at this seminar.
Okay.
That was a lot, I know.
That was really good. I was going to say, I'm glad we got you on the line because that was really helpful feedback. And one thing I was going to mention, I think in the middle there was a question. I think our intent right now is that it would be like when you go to print your fleet certificate. Like, I think our hope is that all of the vehicle ones would be ready at that same time. And I think it's something that needs to get worked out. But I think the goal is what you said, where, okay, here's my fleet certificate and here's all my vehicle certificates ready to
Right,
print.
right. Well, I'm a little guarded because, we have a process in Portable where if you had a Tier 4 engine, you send it in and you basically almost get an immediate. We're 4 months out still, and that makes it real difficult, especially with the Public Works job set. A lot of times we're going to be told, hey, you won this bid and in 30 days we should start working, and there's a lot going on. So, I just want us to have something, in the temporary could be your annual certification. And then as the equipment arrives on location, you could provide them with the specific piece of equipment certification. I don't know. I mean, you guys can work that out, and you guys are pretty good at doing all that. I just know how hard it is to change your website, and I don't envy you.
No, we appreciate the feedback. Jeremy, I want to follow up with you another time on, because I do want to do a time check. We have about 4 minutes left, because I am interested in the Prime Works contractor number from DIR. So I do want to follow up with you on that, but we can do that kind of offline separately, because I'd like to know more about what that is and how maybe we could tie into that or use that process for something if it makes sense. But there was someone who had their hand raised that I do not believe has gotten to speak yet, and so I want to make sure that they're able to before we do our closeout. So
Yes, we have a hand raised from Armand Van Zant. Please unmute yourself and please state your full name and your affiliation.
oh, did they lower their hand?
I think they may have left.
Okay, never mind then.
Are there any other hands raised?
We do have a hand raised from Cynthia Morris. Please state your full name and your affiliation.
Hi, I know you guys are closing up. I just wanted to, there's just one little thing I kept hearing. I wanted to stress that there's no difference between, I feel, from the small contractor to the big contractor. We all have the same requirements. And I felt like there was a little bit of feeling like, well, if they're small, they're behind, or do they got to be taught? We're already way behind, and we're always supposed to be on this already. So anyone that's that behind should be called out and not be able to bid. So that was just one thing. I just want to say, don't treat us differently. I feel like the requirement is still the same across the board. And the guy who spoke before, the AQMD and CARB, and who's inspecting us for off-road equipment, they do come out. They come out to Catalina Island once a year, and they do inspect my small equipment to the biggest. And so I wanted you to know it's not just the big companies that are dealing with it. The small companies are too, and it's okay. And when I bid on a public works job, it's part of the CSLB for my license to have that equipment, that I have all of this information that you're asking. So the bottom line is, you're saying we have to do the ROAR certificate, and then under truck and bus, we have to have our opacity test, And then what you're asking is that a individual certificate for each piece of equipment. So be it, that's fine. And that's how you'll know. And then CHP and AQMD and motor carrier come out and they check it depending on what they're looking for. And that's how you find them. And lastly, that whole thing that guy said about the EIN numbers, I definitely recommend you start with that because those people are not having EIN numbers or there's some other contractors. So you can rule out those guys and then they're not even allowed to bid on a job because you already got a red flag on them and it's reported. So I think that's how it's already working for us right now. So if you're just asking for one more certificate, I think that's great. Keep it simple. Thank you so much. I enjoyed talking to you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the participation. So it is 4:30. I'm willing. I don't know if there's more questions in the chat, but I'll keep going just to I answer if there's still a couple questions. But it is 4:30, so time check. But are there more written questions? Like I said, feel free to leave if you have other meetings. But
There is one last written question by David Schmid. Will a 30-day grace period to the register with doors still be honored?
it's a good question. So I think we're still figuring out how exactly that will work with these requirements. I think our intent is to keep that maintained and honored. But definitely the logistics, we have to make sure we, write it in the right way to keep that going. So that's like a good comment and something that I think the intent is to, but we're still kind of developing how the language will work. I don't know if you had other thoughts, Johanna. But.
Yeah, and I would just like to follow up with if David feels like they're, at this point, until you get that vehicle level certificate, the proposal is that you couldn't operate on any of these job sites. So while there is a 30-day grace period to register indoors, you wouldn't be able to actually operate that job at any of these job sites. So if you feel like there's an issue with that, please feel free to follow up with us. You can send an email, something to the email, or if there's a process that would work, an alternative process that would work, let us know.
He did raise his hand.
Oh,
I can unmute him.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a big problem because we might acquire a piece of equipment from out of state, or well, not from out of state wouldn't be a problem, but if it was from another source in California, it's registered on their doors list. It's going to take time for them to remove it and then for us to be able to add it. And we need to be able to send it immediately to any job site and not put that prime contractor or public works agency at risk.
Okay. So if you have, some suggestions on how we can manage that, maybe some, the liability maybe would go, onto you to make sure that information gets immediately upon receipt of that vehicle certificate. You would supply it to the contractor. How we would manage that, we're totally open to figuring that out. We did identify this as one of those places where we need to do a little bit more work to figure out how it would actually work.
Yeah, because sometimes we're at the mercy of the seller. They've got 30 days to remove it.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to fill out that form because they don't remove it. So right. Yeah, I understand.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or raised hands?
There are no comments or questions at this time.
Okay, sounds good. I think we can wrap up then. Once again, so here's the contact information. If you have feedback, comments on the amendments themselves, you can send it to the ordamendments@arb.ca.gov. We've also included some of the enforcement staff emails. And again, the next couple touch points, the working group on costs and incentives for the entire amendments, not just this requirement, will be beginning of October most likely, and then a public workshop with the whole concept, a lot more detail in the November timeframe. So make sure to sign up for our email list so you get notified of those meetings. And I appreciate everybody who participated. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.